Can I just call out, this looks awesome, by the way, the stage decor, it's feeling very Christmassy. And can I just get a quick show of hands? Do we have any Christmas Grinches in the room today? Anybody who doesn't love Christmas? Got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yes, okay, a few. I'm very, very sorry. And the reason that I'm sorry is that you guys have been having to put up with this since October, because the shopping malls have been having Christmas trees up for months and months and months. But by contrast, can I get a show of hands? Who actually loves Christmas? Yeah, awesome. All right, so cool. So you guys, really, really cool. This is a really, really cool season to be in. We're almost at the end of the year. And if this is your first time here at Gracegate today, I just want to say a massive welcome. And we are finishing the year off with an absolute bang by talking about the best way to live life. So for those of you who don't know who I am, my name is Jamie. I've been serving here at Gracegate for a number of years, usually on the worship team, actually. And I'm very, very excited. And the reason that I'm excited is because of the topic that we're talking about today. It's something that is fulfilling, something that is life-giving, and something that's not necessarily the first thing that comes to your mind when you think of the best way to live life. So if you're joining us on the live stream today, I hope that you're comfortable. I hope you've got your favorite tea or coffee and your favorite mug. And I hope that your internet connection remains stable. And I apologize sincerely if it does not remain stable, because that's probably my fault. I've probably jinxed it, but I hope that it does remain stable. For those of you who are in the building today, I hope you've enjoyed a delicious beverage from our baristas today. Can we give them a hand as well? They do an awesome job every morning. Really well done. I hope you've already had some awesome conversations with the people around you today, and I hope that you're prepared to be a little bit challenged today, but in a good way, and I promise it is in a good way. But first, before we dive in, let's just say a prayer. Hey God, today I am so grateful that you've brought us all here together this morning. Thank you for giving us a safe space to talk about you and your word, God. Thank you for all the people here, for this community. And I pray, God, that you reveal something new to us today when we think about the best way to live life. Amen. All right. So when you think about the best way to live life, what is the first thing that pops into your head? And you don't have to shout it out, just think about it for a second. Hopefully after 5 weeks of this series, it's something that we've already spoken about, but pretend you're not in church for a moment. What does your best, top-tier, Instagram-worthy life look like? What does it include? What do you need that you don't currently have to live the best life possible? Maybe it's a super yacht. Yeah, one of those massive floating buildings with spa pools and jet skis and helicopter pads. You could spend your days sailing across the Mediterranean, standing on the bow with your arms outstretched. The wind is fluttering your French linen shirt behind you. The sunset gently warms your face. That is best life material. Or maybe, even better, maybe it's the rock star lifestyle. Yeah, maybe it's selling out massive concerts and massive arenas, and you've got hundreds of thousands of people flying in from all across the world to come and see you shred on the guitar or play this amazing drum solo. And I've got to be honest, growing up, that was a very, very attractive prospect to me. But hold on for a second. What if I told you that one of the best ways to live life is actually with this thing that we call humility? Now, hear me out for a minute. I know it doesn't sound as glamorous or as exciting as the super yacht or the rock star lifestyle, but I actually reckon that humility is something that can give us even more fulfillment. And it's not just me who thinks that. We actually find that the Bible teaches us that one of the best ways to live life is with humility. So let's talk about it. Probably the easiest place to start when we think about humility is to look at what it is not. So can anybody answer this question for me? What is the opposite of humility? Pride. Got it first go. Hit the nail on the head. That is awesome. Pride. Any other words that spring to mind when we think of pride or the opposite of humility? Ego. Spot on. Who said ego? Well done. Awesome. Any others? Selfishness, arrogance. Yeah, awesome. I've also got self-righteousness or self-centeredness or narcissism, the opposite of humility. Top marks, guys. That's awesome. I've actually got my own little story about pride from just a couple of weeks ago, embarrassingly. This is quite recent. So Naomi and I just went to Melbourne for a few days, which was really, really cool. My folks live over there, and we got to spend a few days with them just hanging out and catching up. because we haven't really been able to do that with all of the COVID restrictions and travel lockdowns and all that kind of stuff. So it was a really, really cool trip. And we stayed right in the heart of the city. So everything was within walking distance. I don't know if anyone's been to Melbourne before, maybe a few of you have, but it's a really cool city. Everything's really close together. If you can't walk somewhere, you can just hop on a tram and you can get there as well. Super cool city, so everything's within walking distance. And we pretty much spent the whole time on our feet, walking around the city, going between shops and cafes and restaurants and doing touristy things, and then going to more shops and more cafes and more restaurants, and it was really, really cool, just nice, really relaxing time. But we did have to try and be a little bit strategic with how much walking we were doing, because Nim actually sprained her ankle on the first day that we were there, which is not a great city to sprain your ankle in, given how much walking that you have to do. So walking for more than a few minutes at a time was actually quite painful for her, and it was also at half speed. So if we knew that we had to do a lot of walking, we tried to break it up by stopping at a cafe for a little bit for a coffee. I know, it sounds terrible, hard life. Where's my super yacht? I think it was on the third day that we were coming back from a full day of walking, and we were knackered. So we started heading back to the Airbnb to get ready for dinner, and I'm usually pretty good with directions. Once I've been somewhere a couple of times, I can get a lay of the land, and I was pretty confident that I knew the layout of the city well enough to get back without looking at a map. I think you can probably see where this is going. So I kind of knew where we were going, but of course I didn't want anybody to actually think that I didn't know where we were going. So I decided I'd lead the way back from memory, which was a fantastic plan. Can we all agree? That was a really, really good idea. Go Jamie, awesome, nailed it. So we started walking. And after a couple of minutes, we were still walking. But at that point, we definitely should have been there by now. And Nim started pointing out a couple of shops that we'd passed again. And we started seeing them again. And she suggested that we change direction. But of course, I especially didn't want her to think that I don't know where we're going, because I'm a capable man, right? I'm good with directions. I'm a capable man. I know where we're going. Just hold off. I've got this, okay? Sorry, Nim. So I did what any reasonable person would do in that scenario. I just stuck to my guns. And I doubled down and I said, no, we're close. No, it's just around the corner. So we went around the corner. Okay. That's the corner there. So we went around this corner. Oh, no, it's not this one. Oh, maybe it's this one. Okay, maybe. I actually don't know where we're going after all. So after about 10 minutes of walking around, and this is no joke, it was literally about 10 minutes of just aimless wandering around the city, I had to swallow my pride, and we looked at the map, and it turns out that we had just walked in this great big circle all around the Airbnb, which was right in the middle. This great big circle around where we wanted to be. All the while, Nim's on a sprained ankle, walking at half speed, just because I didn't want to admit that I was wrong, and she was right, and I didn't know where we were going after all. And, as if I didn't learn my lesson the first time, I did exactly the same thing the very next day. No joke, the same thing the next day, because I thought I knew it this time, and I still didn't. It became very clear to me that I wasn't allowed to give any more directions on that trip. Now, it might sound a little bit silly, but in those moments, I genuinely let my pride get the better of me, because I didn't want to admit that I was wrong. So how about this for a question? Is pride always bad for you? Interesting question. Instinctively, I think we should say, yes, pride is bad for you because it makes your head big. But I think there's actually a little bit more to it than that. I mean, what about when you accomplish a goal that you've been working towards for a long time? Maybe you've finished building something or training for something, and you're stoked with the end result. Is it wrong to be proud of that achievement? Interesting. Okay, well, how about when someone who you care about achieves something really good? Maybe they've won a prestigious award or they've accomplished one of their own goals. Is it wrong to be proud of them? Tricky one. But I think there's actually a difference between being proud of someone and being a prideful person. Celebrating someone's achievements, including your own, is an awesome way to build self-confidence and self-esteem. But on the other hand, being a prideful person is leaning more towards that arrogance and that egotism. And more specifically, it's believing that you are better than other people. Everybody else is less than you. And I think that's exactly what we're talking about here when we're talking about pride. Pride is dangerous. We know this. When someone becomes prideful and their ego gets too big, they can start to form beliefs that they're better than everybody else. They start treating the people around them as lesser or as inferior or not as good as them, and that's not fun to be around. And it's interesting to see that God warns us about this throughout the Bible plenty of times. Just search for pride in the YouVersion Bible app and you'll see what I mean. There are countless references to the word pride. For example, in Proverbs, in chapter 16, it says, "Pride goes before destruction, a haughty spirit before a fall." So pride leads to destruction. And I had to actually look up the word haughty. Does anybody know what haughty means? Yeah, basically arrogant. It means arrogantly superior. So we see here that having an arrogantly superior spirit leads to a fall. Or how about this one, which is also in Proverbs, but in chapter 11. It says, "When pride comes, then comes disgrace. But with humility comes wisdom." So again, pride leads to disgrace. And do you see that sneaky little reference to humility in there? It's okay. We'll get to that in a second. So what about this in Romans chapter 12? "For by the grace given me, I say to every one of you, do not think of yourself more highly than you ought, but rather think of yourself with sober judgment, in accordance with the faith that God has distributed to each of you." With sober judgment. I love that phrase. Without being clouded by prideful thoughts, with modesty, with humility. See, humility is the absolute opposite of pride and arrogance, and the dictionary actually defines humility as having a modest or a low view of one's self-importance. But I don't think it's about having a low self-esteem or having a low self-worth or believing that you are nothing. It's about having that sober judgment about yourself. It's about being modest and not proud. Humility isn't boastful, doesn't show off. It's not about viewing yourself as superior to others. It's actually about seeing yourself and everyone around you as being equally valuable. It's authentic and genuine. It's not about recognition. It lives behind the scenes, not in the spotlight. It's quiet. Now, Jesus had a fair bit to say about humility, and he often taught in these things called parables. Now, if you don't know what a parable is, it's basically just a short and simple story that he used to illustrate a specific point or communicate a specific message. And in the book of Luke, in chapter 18, we find that Jesus is sharing the parable of the Pharisee and the tax collector. And it goes like this in verse 9. "To some who were confident of their own righteousness and looked down on everybody else, Jesus told this parable." So we can see immediately this is going to be a parable or a teaching about pride and arrogance or humility. So it goes on. Verse 10. "Two men went up to the temple to pray. One, a Pharisee, and the other, a tax collector." So for a bit of context, the Pharisees were a group of religious leaders who followed very strict and very legalistic traditions. And their whole focus was on living by the letter of the law to try and stay in God's good books. They're often considered to have looked down on everybody else and how they lived their lives, and you could describe this as being a little bit arrogant. The other man was a tax collector, and tax collectors at the time were among the most hated people of society. And I don't think any of us particularly enjoy paying tax here today in this day and age, but these people were considered to be among the lowest of the low. They were seen as cheaters, and they were seen as traitors, and they were seen as liars and thieves. Okay? So we've got these two people who are complete polar opposites by society at the time, and they've gone up to this temple to pray, the Pharisee and the tax collector. So let's see what happens. "The Pharisee stood by himself and prayed, 'God, I thank you that I am not like other people, robbers, evildoers, adulterers, or even like this tax collector.'" Oh, brutal, so rude. And then he goes on, "I fast twice a week, and I give a tenth of all that I get." What do you notice about the Pharisee's prayer? It's all about him. Instantly, he's looking down on other people. He's thanking God that he's not like them. He's better than them. He's literally comparing himself to others and then positioning himself above them in his mind. And as if that wasn't enough, he then goes on And he boasts actually about what he tries to do to get on God's good side, how often he fasts, how much he tithes. He even gives numbers to it, like it's some kind of competition, like he's going to win an award if he achieves the most fasting and achieves the most tithing. Not exactly humble. So it goes on, verse 13. But the tax collector stood at a distance. He would not even look up to heaven, but he beat his breast and he said, God, have mercy on me, a sinner. Bit of a different vibe from the tax collector here, right? Instead of trying to impress God by talking himself up as being superior, he actually does the complete opposite. He very humbly describes himself as a sinner, looking at himself with that sober judgment, and he asks for God's mercy. He's not trying to show off to anybody. This is a lot more genuine. So let's see what Jesus has to say about this in verse 14. I tell you that this man, aka the tax collector, rather than the other, went home justified before God, or right with God. For all those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and all those who humble themselves will be exalted. Now, exalt just means to speak or to think very highly of. So in other words, all those who think highly of themselves will be humbled, and all those who humble themselves will be thought highly of. So in this parable, the lowly tax collector who came to God and begged for mercy in humility was actually the one that was justified with God or was right with God. But the Pharisee who came and focused on why he thought he was better than everybody else with pride was not. And what Jesus is teaching us here is that God values humility and despises pride. And this makes a lot of sense when we think of those verses that we looked at earlier as well. So we often use this word countercultural to describe a lot of what Jesus taught, which just means the opposite of what the world is trying to teach us. And this approach to humility is just another example of those countercultural teachings, because what's crazy is that the world actually teaches us to be more prideful than it does to be humble. It encourages us to find our self-worth and affirmation from the people around us, and it feels good to have people think highly of us and to feel like we're better than other people. We're encouraged to brag about our successes to our friends and our colleagues and on social media and to count the number of likes that we got and increase engagement for the next one and increase our number of followers. I mean, we're pushed to have more than other people, to earn more than other people, to look better than other people, to be better than other people. If we're not better than other people or getting better in life, then we actually must be doing something wrong, right? We must be falling behind. So let me ask you this question. Are we living our lives by chasing the affirmation of other people? Or in other words, are we living our lives with a focus on trying to get recognition or praise from the people around us? And as a follow-up question to that, can we actually ever truly be fulfilled if we're constantly relying on the praise and affirmation from other people around us in order to determine our happiness and our self-worth? Now, it shouldn't come as a surprise that living your life with this constant worry about what people think of you is not a sustainable way to live. I mean, people are human, right? People make mistakes. They're going to let you down from time to time. And if you've built this identity of yourself and self-worth around what other people think about you, it's only a matter of time before that prideful bubble bursts. There has to be a better way to live life. And as Christians, we believe that Jesus actually models it for us. And he shows us the best way to live. And that is with humility. So, what does it actually look like to live with humility? How can we let go of prideful thoughts and attitudes to become more humble? And thankfully, the Bible actually gives us even more wisdom around this. And I want to break this up into two parts to make it really straightforward and easy to remember. We find that in order to live humbly and to live the best possible life, we have to do two things. The first is to humble yourself to others, to the people around you. And the second thing is to humble yourself to God. So first off, the Bible teaches us to show humility towards the people around us. And we see this in Ephesians chapter 4, which gives us a little bit of an insight. It says in verse 2, be completely humble and gentle. Be patient, bearing with one another in love. Humility is gentle. It is patient. It's understanding that nobody's perfect, and it's accepting that we're all flawed. But that doesn't mean that anybody is inferior to or less than anybody else. It's also accepting that we're not always right. In fact, often we're wrong, especially when we're giving directions in Melbourne with your partner on a sprained ankle. And it's okay to admit that when you're wrong. It's showing love to one another. Galatians gives us a little bit more detail on the practical side of things as well when it comes to showing humility to the people around you. And it says, "You, my brothers and sisters, were called to be free, but do not use your freedom to indulge the flesh. Rather, serve one another humbly in love." This word here, serve. Humility is serving other people without an expectation of recognition. It's building other people up rather than building ourselves up. It's not about us. It's not about our desires or our wants or our needs. It's about the people around us. It's putting other people first. But it is also asking for help when we need it. It's accepting that we can't do everything ourselves. If you want something physical that you can do to practice humility, just listen out for a need in the conversations you have on a daily basis. There's so many needs out there. Maybe it's someone who needs help with transport, or someone who has something that needs something done around the house, or someone who just wants an ear to listen to them, or a shoulder to cry on. When you find that need, why not go out of your way and be the person to fill that need with humility, without this expectation of being recognized or praised for doing that thing? Serve one another humbly in love. And the second thing, the Bible teaches us to show humility towards God, and it's actually in our best interests to humble ourselves to God. And we see this in the book of James. In chapter 4, in verse 6, it says, "But he gives us more grace. That is why Scripture says, God opposes the proud, but shows favor to the humble. Submit yourselves then to God. Resist the devil, and he will flee from you." It goes on, and just a few verses later in verse 10, it says, "Humble yourselves before the Lord, and he will lift you up." And it's not just a one-off. We find that a very similar message is actually repeated in 1 Peter in chapter 5. It says, "Humble yourselves, therefore, under God's mighty hand, that he may lift you up in due time." It isn't always easy to humble ourselves before God. I mean, we don't even like to admit to each other when we need help, let alone to God. And I think one of the most subtle forms of pride, actually, is believing that we can do life by ourselves, believing that we've got it all covered. But humbling ourselves to God means acknowledging that we do need him, and in fact, we are better off in life when we have a thriving relationship with him, when we rely on his strength and his wisdom and his forgiveness and his guidance and his love. See, we can actually take a leaf out of the tax collector's book when it comes to practicing this by praying for mercy, by actually acknowledging that, yes, we are all sinners. We are far from perfect, but it is his grace and his kindness and his forgiveness that saves us, not our own actions, not our prideful thoughts. So have a think about the areas of your life where you might be struggling with prideful thoughts. Maybe it's in your relationships or in your workplace or in your possessions or just your general attitude towards life. And see if you can turn that into a prayer of humility to God. Now, Jesus himself was the ultimate example of humility, not just in his teachings like the parables, but also in the way that he lived his own life here on earth. And the Apostle Paul was an influential follower of Jesus, and he wrote about Christ's humility, and we can find this in Philippians chapter 2. And I think this just sums up Jesus' humility perfectly. And it actually starts by giving us even more advice on how to humble ourselves to other people. It says, "Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourselves, not looking to your own interests, but to each of you the interests of others." Are you seeing how important this is? How many times this concept of humility is repeated and reinforced throughout the Bible? It's not just a one-off, it's a very core concept. It goes on. And this time we start to see some more of Jesus' own humility. In verse 5 it says, "In your relationships with one another, have the same mindset as Christ Jesus, who being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage." Get this, okay? Jesus is the Messiah, right? He's the Son of God. He could have quite easily roamed around the world just demanding that people bow down to him instantly, and he probably would have had every right to do so. But he did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. That would have been the prideful thing to do, to look down on everybody else from this position of superiority. But he actually did the complete opposite. I mean, check this out. In verse 7, "Rather, he made himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness." Instead, Jesus spent his time here on earth serving other people by taking on the nature of the servant. I mean, he did some amazing things. He healed the sick, and he gave sight to the blind. And he did also some more subtle things. He hung out with the poor. He hung out with the hated and the outcasts. He washed the feet of his disciples. He served. And then finally in verse 8, we see that he gave the ultimate sacrifice. "And being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even death on a cross." Jesus humbled himself so much that he gave his life for the sins of mankind. He died so that we could live. And in my mind, there is no greater show of humility than that. If you are a follower of Jesus, if you consider yourself a Christian, if you believe that his teachings are the best way to live life, I challenge you to take a good, hard look at where you might be struggling with prideful thinking today. Have a think about where you might need to humble yourself to others and where you might need to humble yourself to God. Because there is a better way to live life than with pride and with arrogance. And we can continue to look to Jesus as a role model for this. If church is new to you, if you're new to this whole God thing, then thank you so much for being here today, and thank you so much for your attention. And I hope that you can see why we value humility so much as a value, and how it can lead to a life that is more fulfilling than one that is filled with pride. So let's finish with a prayer. Hey God, today, we just thank you for your wisdom, Lord. Thank you that you care about us so deeply to give us these lessons, Lord, and for sending Jesus down, Lord, to die for us. Please help us to stay humble, God. Help us to do away with prideful thoughts, and help us to keep our focus on you. Help us to listen to what it is you're trying to teach us today, God. And I just want to say a massive thank you again for everyone in this community, Lord. Thank you for everything that you've done, everything that you're doing, everything that you will do, God. In your glorious name, amen.